Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that we would talk about the Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal aftermath in the fight. So, we're going to look at Megan Olivi's interview with Jorge Masvidal after the fight. We're going to take a look and see what they have to say. Megan Olivi is a UFC interviewer. She usually interviews the fighters, I believe, a little bit before the fights and a little bit after the fights. All right. And also at the press conference as well. But anyway, so she's been around for a while. She always, I think, gives out pretty decent interviews right after the fight. And Jorge Masvidal is going to talk about his most recent loss. All right. But before we go into it, it just never fails to surprise me how little people actually know about martial arts. This includes MMA and the UFC and also boxing as well, because boxing also is a martial art. But when it comes down to the overall, it just it surprises me. It always surprises me, but yet does not surprise me how little people really knew going into this fight. Because of the comments that you can see of people saying, well, this fight is so boring. All he's doing is hugging him and all sort of stuff. I don't know what people really expected from this fight. Now, if you watch Kamaru Usman's last fight against Colby Covington, yes, he did strike with Colby, but the reason why he struck with Colby Covington was because Colby Covington pretty much was the same exact fighter that Kamaru Usman was. They both have the same issues. They both have the same strengths. They're both great wrestlers, and they're both great clinch guys. All right, when it comes down to the overall, meaning what? That they probably didn't want to risk it in the clinch or on the ground with each other. That's probably what they didn't want to do. All right, so it is because both of those guys are A-grade wrestlers and A-grade in the clinch. All right, Masvidal isn't, he's a decent striker. You might call him an A-grade striker. All right, Gilbert Burns is someone to where you can say he looks to have both. All right, so that's why Gilbert Burns is going to be a major problem. So Usman will have to watch out for him. But when it comes down to the overall bottom line is this. I've been telling people about Masvidal for a very long time. All right. And if you know anything about both of these fighters, you've been watching this sport for a very long time. If you've known about both of these fighters, if you've seen the way that they fight, you should have not been surprised by the outcome. And you should have not been surprised at the way that Usman fought. I already told people this. He should not strike with Jorge Masvidal. If he wants to beat Jorge Masvidal, he has to do the same thing that he was going to do with Gilbert Burns. All right? That the strategy would not even really have to change up that much because Jorge Masvidal is primarily a striker. Now, he has a very decent ground game. Many people say, well, he just needs to improve his ground game. Jorge Masvidal is actually a very underrated grappler. He has a very good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I've seen him on the ground with certain very good fighters on the ground like Michael Chiesa and a couple of the other ones. All right? It's not necessarily that his ground game is bad, but Kamaru Usman is a lot like Khabib Nurmagomedov. I'm not saying he's quite as dominant like Khabib Nurmagomedov, but when it comes down to it, Khabib and Kamaru Usman are so similar to the point to where they have not only an all-around great skill set, but when it comes down to the overall, they're so dominant in one area that is going to be, I'm not going to say impossible, but it seems almost nearly impossible to beat those opponents in certain circumstances. Kamaru Usman has a very wide upper, body. He's very, very upper body strong. He has excellent technique, excellent mental, toughness. On top of that, his wrestling is just A class. A class, one of the best wrestlers I've personally ever seen. I'm not going to quite call him on the level of Khabib Nurmagomedov, but his wrestling, if you can dominate Tyron Woodley the way that you did, and dominate Jorge Masvidal the way that you did, I've only seen two people pretty much suffocate Jorge Masvidal on the ground the whole entire time. That was Damian Maia, who's probably the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner I've personally ever seen, at least in the UFC's history, and Kamaru Usman. That's it. Those are the only two ground guys that I've ever seen suffocate Jorge Masvidal on the ground. And he had no answers for either of them. All right? So it is what it is. But Jorge Masvidal, and I've been telling people this for a very long time, he is not championship material. And a lot of people are not going to agree with that, but it is what it is. He proved it. And a certain amount of people overall, they say, well, he only had 6 days' notice. A certain amount of these fighters are always in very good condition. And I'm not saying it didn't have a little bit of an effect. I'm sure it did. But a lot of these fighters stay in condition. All right, Jorge Masvidal has even said himself that he stays in condition, that he's ready. All right, he took the fight on 6 days' notice. He didn't say overall, well, you know what, I need a full training camp. The reason why Masvidal took this is because he was scared that if he did not take this opportunity now, that he may not get this title shot. He said that Dana overall offered him more money. That's bullshit. Dana White offered him a title shot. That's all he really wanted, and that's fine. All right, but that's what he was afraid of. He was afraid he was not going to get his title shot. Well, he got it, and he failed. And a lot of people overall are not going to like me saying that, but it is what it is. All right, you should have not expected anything different out of Kamaru Usman. That's how he fights, primarily against strikers. He's an excellent wrestler, and he was not going to be able to strike with Jorge Masvidal. I said if he tries to strike with Masvidal, he's going to get knocked out. All right, and Kamaru Usman could tell that very, very early on. But anyway, we're going to see what Jorge Masvidal says. We're going to see overall what he goes over, and let's get into it.
I just would love to know, I mean, obviously your expectations were to leave here with the belt, but how did this fight play out as compared to how you imagined it?
I'm going to tell you this fight played out exactly as I imagined it. There's not one thing that I was surprised about in this fight. Not one thing. Not one thing. Kamaru Usman dominated in the fashion that I exactly predicted him to. I predicted Kamaru Usman to win either 4 rounds to 1 or 5 rounds to 0. Personally, I gave it to Usman 5 rounds to 0. I don't see a round where Masvidal could have won. Some would say the first round, but to me personally, I don't even think I would give him that one. Although he did land some very good strikes in the first round. But anyway.
I was cutting a lot of weight, so I wanted to take him out fast, come in there hard, and he stuck to the game plan, fought a beautiful fight, was able to wear me out, was able to take my explosiveness away. You know, I'm not going to make excuses, but I'm going to get on the winning track and fight him with a full camp, 7-8 weeks to prepare for him and make the weight cut smooth and give him my all once again. I know after going with him now 5 rounds, I know what it takes to beat him, and I can beat him. He's a great
I can tell by the inflection on your voice, you do not truly believe that. You are very afraid of that man when it comes down to the overall. You're afraid. I think you want a rematch with him, Jorge, just to try and prove yourself. But I can tell by the way that you're talking, you don't truly believe that you can beat that man. You do not truly believe that you can beat that man. And I understand people are going to say, well, it was only on 6 days' notice and all sort of shit. And when it comes down to it, listen, I get it. But there's been many fighters to win on short, short days' notice. All right, Nate Diaz beat Conor McGregor on short days' notice. Daniel Cormier beat Anthony Johnson on short days' notice. You know, when that dude, John Jones, I can't even remember what the fuck he did at that time. Overall, what he did that time. But it was John Jones versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. And then John Jones had to pull out because he got in trouble for God knows what. And then overall, Daniel Cormier had to step in. All right? He dominated the fight. Nate Diaz won against Conor McGregor on short days' notice. Michael Bisping won against Luke Rockhold when Luke Rockhold was training for a couple months for Chris Weidman. All right? So a lot of these MMA fighters are always in great condition, and they're prepared to take a lot of these fights. Masvidal got thoroughly dominated. And also, let's keep in mind, Justin Gaethje also stepped in, I believe, a little bit on short days' notice against Tony Ferguson. This is not a 6-day cut. That's not the complete issue. I'm not saying it was not a little bit of an issue. I'm not saying overall that it was not somewhat of an issue. But there's been many fighters in the past, even as of recently. Once again, Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. Take a look at that. All right, now he had a little bit more time, I believe, than Masvidal. I could be wrong about that. But when it comes down to it overall, I believe that he did have more time than Masvidal. This was not necessarily the 6-day cut. Masvidal ended up being exhausted, I'm sure, a little bit because of the cut overall. But when it comes down to it, the main reason why he was so exhausted was because Usman's wrestling and him trying to constantly get Usman off of him is exhausting. It's a very taxing fight. Usman is constant pressure. He's constant pressure, and I said this, to win this fight, he would need to wrestle him. He would need to get him in the clinch. He would need to make this a very dirty fight. A lot of the things I said about the Tyson Fury-Deontay Wilder rematch, if Tyson Fury wants to win against Deontay Wilder, he's going to have to lean on him. He's going to have to make this a dirty fight. He's going to have to clinch with him. He's going to have to ragdoll him. And it's the same thing with Usman here in the Jorge Masvidal fight, and that's exactly what he did. He stomped on the toes, he dug his fist into the ribs, he kneed him in the knees, kneed him in the thighs, shouldered him in the face. He was always giving him something to think about. All right? And that gives you more opportunities for takedowns later on. That gives you more opportunities for strikes later on. This fight reminded me a lot of Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, where Conor McGregor, you can maybe say, was not at 100% in the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight, although Conor, I believe, did have a full training camp. He was off for a couple of years and yada, 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 yada. And he didn't look as sharp as he usually did in that fight. But the bottom line is this. I think Conor McGregor could be at 150%. I think he could be at 2001%. And I don't think that Khabib Nurmagomedov would ever lose to Conor, at least not in most circumstances. So when it comes down to it, there's just certain things you take a look at and it's like, wow, this dude is so dominant in this one category that I just don't think that this guy's going to lose to this guy. Not to Jorge Masvidal. It's just not going to happen. And once again, I've already said this. Masvidal, although a very decent fighter, he is a very, he has been a little bit overrated in certain circumstances. Masvidal is not championship caliber material. He might be a top 3 guy, but that's really about it. Because when you really take a look at it, we already know he's not beating Usman. We just seen that ass kicking. But when you talk about, Colby Covington, he may be able to defeat Colby Covington. Maybe. But I'm not even sure if he'd defeat Colby. I'd probably place my money a little bit on Colby. When you talk about Tyron Woodley, he possibly could defeat Tyron Woodley at this point in time in his career just because Woodley is getting a little bit older and he suffered 2 losses in a row. But I'm not even sure if I'd pick him over Tyron Woodley. When you talk about him versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, a lot of people don't remember this. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, just a couple years ago, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson whooped Jorge Masvidal's ass. A lot of people don't remember that fight. That would be an interesting rematch even. Now he might beat him now just because Stephen Wonderboy doesn't look to be the same. He might beat these fighters now just because they don't, they're not necessarily as dominant as they once were. But Jorge Masvidal, he's not championship level material. And a lot of people are not going to like that. He's not championship level material. He never has been, even when he's improved his game. Because there's a difference between Jorge Masvidal, who is a very decent fighter with a very decent, foundation of skills, and a Kamaru Usman, who's probably going to be one of the greatest champions ever remembered in the UFC's history. He is so dominant in the wrestling category that it's going to be so hard and so overall challenging for anyone to defeat him. Once again, a lot like Khabib Nurmagomedov. Khabib is not necessarily the greatest striker, and there's some other weaknesses in his game. But with his wrestling and a certain amount of other things, since he's so dominant in that one category, it looks like he has a great all-around game. And the strikes will come a little bit later on, as you've seen with Usman and Masvidal. Usman did actually start to outstrike Masvidal in some of the latter rounds because Masvidal was so exhausted, and also he was so worried about the takedowns. All right? But anyway, so this fight played out exactly as I thought it would. It is what it is. And Masvidal is a very good fighter. But when he defeated Nate Diaz and also went on this streak and, with his attitude and a certain amount of other things, Masvidal attracts a very certain type of crowd, and that's the street trash crowd. That's the street trash fan base. That's the street trash crowd. The same crowd that follows Allen Iverson, the same crowd that follows both the Diaz brothers, the same crowd that follows, I'm sure, a certain amount of other athletes that I'm not mentioning. All right, the wannabe thug, wannabe gangster fan base. That's what fan base follows around people like Jorge Masvidal. All right, so it is what it is. So a lot of them ended up getting pissed off and showed their idiocy overall by not really doing their research overall and showing that they don't really know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to this sport. Once again, you should have not expected anything else. All right? But anyway, and I'm going to tell you this. A certain amount of people might say, well, if you think Jorge Masvidal had a full training camp, do you think he'd beat Usman? I don't think he'd ever beat Usman. Because Usman is going to do the exact same thing in a rematch that he did in their first fight. And it might even end up worse. So it is what it is. If I were Jorge, at least he's saying that he needs a couple of wins, because that's exactly what you need. All right? That's exactly what you need. Because as of right now, dude, you do not deserve this rematch. You need a couple of wins. So at least I'm glad that Jorge seems to be giving Kamaru Usman a lot of credit. He is bringing up the thing of 6 days notice, but that's not really an excuse. It probably did tax him a little bit, but it didn't tax him nearly as much as many people would actually think. All right? So it is what it is. But when it comes down to the overall, yes, Masvidal does need to get on the winning track. Yes, he does. All right? That means what? Next is either Colby Covington or Tyron Woodley, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Who knows? Possibly even Gilbert Burns, but I don't see that because Gilbert is most likely going to get Usman next. That's going to be a terrific fight. But anyway, we'll see what happens.
Competitor, he showed some different things in the fight. I'm just not convinced that I can't beat him with a full training camp, so I would love nothing more than instead of 6 days, 6 weeks. It'll happen if I got to win another fight or so, whatever I got to do to get back on the high horse and compete against this man again.
I don't believe that he believes that, but whatever.
I mean, that's
off to him, though. All props to him.
It's absolutely understandable that, you had 6 days notice here that you would want a full training camp for it. I mean, after that first round, now many people thought you won that first round. I believe one of the judges gave it to you. Did you feel...
I personally don't see how. I know Masvidal ended up getting some very good strikes in there, but when it came down to it, I did not see enough overall to where Jorge Masvidal could have won that first round. All right, I didn't see it. I thought that judge was, definitely miscalculating that round. In MMA, and a lot of people also were confused on the Max Holloway and Volkanovski card as well. You got a lot of people screaming robbery because they tuned into this card and, they have no idea how to score an MMA fight. The Volkanovski Max Holloway one, you can argue win for Max Holloway. The thing is with MMA, when you take a look at that third round between Max Holloway and Volkanovski, Volkanovski was starting to land the more impactful punches. Now, it was still a very close round, and Max Holloway might have been landing more strikes overall, but a lot of the strikes that he was landing was not impactful. Those lead leg kicks, they don't count those very often. That's why Amanda Nunes won against Valentina Shevchenko in the rematch. All right, that's why a certain amount of these other guys, they win in, a certain amount of their other fights. Because Max Holloway in that third round, he was starting to slow down. And he was competing with Volkanovski in terms of the leg kicks. Now, Volkanovski, I thought, should have threw more leg kicks. But he started landing more leg kicks. He started landing power leg kicks with his, not with his lead leg, but with his back leg. He started landing power leg kicks. He started landing power punches. He started outstarting Max with the hands. So if you're asking me, did I disagree with the Max Holloway-Volkanovski score? No, I didn't disagree with it at all. In fact, I had the exact same score. I had Volkanovski winning 3-2, but if you saw Max Holloway winning 3-2, I have no problem with that either. That was a very close fight, but I have no problem with the decision at the end of the day. It pretty much reflects how close the fight actually was. So it is what it is. But once again, you got these guys saying, oh, I thought Max Holloway won 4-1. No offense, but you really don't know what the hell you're talking about. So it is what it is. But anyway, but once again, you're going to find a lot of people commentating on this card because they, Jorge Masvidal is a decently popular fighter. He attracted a certain amount of the street trash, wannabe thug fan base, and a certain amount of the other fans that probably watched Nate Diaz when he fought Conor McGregor. Then they watched Jorge Masvidal completely rip Nate Diaz apart. All right, and that's another thing, by the way. I told people this as well. There is a complete difference in opponents between Ben Askren, Nate Diaz, and Darren Till, and Kamaru Usman. Darren Till was a very decent win. He was pretty much in his prime. Now, of course, he had just recently suffered a loss. But when it came down to it overall, that was a very decent win that he had. He ended up knocking him out in round 2. Very strong opponent, very decently, very decent striker, and a certain amount of other things. So, very decent win there. No doubt about it. All right. The Ben Askren one I never really took overly seriously. And a lot of people are not going to like that. Ben Askren, had he been fighting in the UFC, and a lot of people overall, they always get after people when they say it's only the UFC that matters. There's a reason why people say that. And I'm not saying that it's only the UFC fighters that matter, but there's a reason why people say if you don't fight in the UFC, we don't really take you that seriously. And Ben Askren is a great prime example of this. Because if you don't fight in the UFC, what does that really mean, at least in today's times? You're not really fighting the elites of the elites. All right, that's just the bottom line. Ben Askren, had he been fighting in the UFC this whole entire time, he probably would have not even been a top 10 guy. Just taking a look at him fight. I mean, the dude lost to like a 39-year-old Damian Maia. So it is what it is. And he's supposed to be, the greatest wrestler. The dude was a hype job. And no, it's no offense to him. I'm not calling his career a failure. Anyone who makes it to the professional level of MMA, their career is not a failure. All right? If you're a professional, whatever you do, you're not a failure. But when it comes down to it, there are certain people that live up to the hype. We don't have to sugarcoat things with that. All right? Ben Askren was a hype job, and Masvidal pretty much ended that train. All right? Robbie Lawler nearly ended that train, and that was a washed-up version of Robbie Lawler. But it is what it is. But anyway, and then when it came down to it overall with Nate Diaz, that was a very impressive win. I actually thought Nate Diaz would give Masvidal a lot more trouble because Masvidal has always had an issue not throwing enough sometimes. But he was very articulate in that fight. He was very accurate. He paced himself very well. So he pretty much whooped Nate Diaz's ass. I was very impressed with Masvidal in that fight. But Nate Diaz also has a very big problem. He really has always had really never a great foundation of skills. Kamaru Usman was going to be a completely different type of fighter that Jorge Masvidal fought. And a lot of the people did not expect the train that was going to run over Masvidal in this fight. Because there's a complete difference between those three fighters that Masvidal fought and the great fighter, the all-time great fighter that Kamaru Usman is. Usman is not just a great fighter. He's probably going to end up as one of the greatest fighters to ever fight in the UFC. All right? So it is what it is. Kamaru Usman is on a completely different level, not only from Jorge Masvidal's opponents, but from Jorge Masvidal himself. And a lot of people did not know what Jorge was getting himself into. But anyway.
Like you were fading in terms of your cardio after that first 5 minutes?
Kamaru Usman, to put it, was by far the greatest opponent Jorge Masvidal has ever faced, and he lost 5 rounds to 0. I give him credit for his heart. I give him credit for taking the fight on 6 days' notice, although one could say that, really you don't need to, because he took this fight because he had something in it for himself as well. All right, because overall, he feared that he was not going to get a title shot. And some could certainly say that he was not the first one to deserve it anyway. So it is what it is. But anyway.
I felt like he was holding me up against the cage to wear me out. And I was trying to pick my spots and explode, but I waited too much. I didn't also have faith in the cardio that I did have to go hard for a couple, 2-3 rounds. I was trying to...
You know why Masvidal was waiting so much? Because he was so afraid of the takedowns. And you notice this with certain fighters. Conor McGregor waited a lot in the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight. You know why that is? Because he was so afraid that if he overextended against Khabib would easily take him down. You notice with a lot of these wrestlers, a lot of these strikers, they end up overall waiting a lot in these fights. They end up overall not looking as fresh. You know why that is? Because overall when it comes down to it, and the wrestlers even start out striking them. And they say, well, that fighter obviously wasn't fresh, because why would the wrestler be out striking them? It's very simple, because they're so afraid of the takedowns. They're so afraid of the takedowns, they don't expect certain strikes to be incoming. Or they're so worried about the takedowns, they can't necessarily focus on the hand-to-hand combat as much. So they end up getting hit when they wouldn't usually before. It's very simple.
Space it out and pick my spots, and he picked his spots better. No excuses. He was a better man tonight. God walks with me, so I'll be back. I just got to get a couple of victories. I'll be back better than ever.
Well, once again, I'm glad that you said overall that you need a couple victories, because there's no way you get an immediate rematch. No way you deserve it, and no way overall that anyone wants to see that, or at least no one else besides your street trash fan base and the Latino fan base. And I'm not calling the Latino fan base street trash, but Masvidal, of course, for those of you guys that don't know, is of Cuban descent, and I believe he's also got another Hispanic or Latino lineage background as well, somewhere from either Central or South America. I can't remember where. But when it comes down, it might be Peruvian, but I'm not sure. When it comes down to the overall bottom line is this: a lot of the Latino fans also were tuning into this fight as well. And if you know about the Latino fan base, whether it comes in the boxing or whether it comes in the UFC, if their fights don't pan out the way that they think they are, what do they usually say? Well, this fight was boring. This fight was this fight was that, this fight was this. Especially if it ends up in a dominant fashion and a decision in the other fighter's favor. All right? But anyway.
As you say, I'll be back. Do you have any idea? I know it's very hard, as you literally just left the octagon, but when you would like to be able to jump back into training and be able to compete sometime in the year of 2020?
Don't worry, it's not Corona. I don't know. That's up to my management, my team. I'm going to sit down with them, discuss the best possible options back to Kamaru. And I'm a competitor. I've been doing this for 16 years. I'm not going to stop till I get that belt. I don't care if it was. I'm very stubborn. I knew the 6 days and the 20 pounds could affect me, but I always bet on myself and I believe in myself. I'm not going to rest till I get that belt wrapped around my waist. He gave me the best that he had, and it was good for tonight. But he knows I'm a lot tougher than he expected. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get back in the ring opposite of him and get this show cracking. We're going to do this again. I want to give a big thanks to American Top Team, Paulino Hernandez, Mike Brown, Jesus Gallo, Abraham Kawa, Charlie Deca, Nathan Coy, Steve Mako, Mo Lual, the whole American Top Team, Richie Puma, everybody back home, Elite Athletes Performance out of Miami, Vital Proteins, Monster, Recuerdo. I love everybody. Bochin, Checho, I love you guys. I'm sorry. To my daughter and my son, I'm sorry. Gosh, I hate freaking losing in front of my kids. That's one thing that hurts me. I'm sorry. I'll be back though, better than ever.
I'm sure there's no apologies needed to your children who love their...
Well, good job for you, Jorge Masvidal, overall, for at least, trying to keep your head high overall and being honest with yourself. All right, overall, that you completely lost this fight and you lost it dominantly, and that overall you do not deserve an immediate rematch. Because, and I gotta, say that Jorge Masvidal is not necessarily the person that I thought he was. He does talk a lot of trash before the fights, but he seems to hold himself in decently high regard. Do I find him as professional as some of the other fighters I've seen? No, but, it is what it is. Now, his fan base, a lot of his fan base, because of the way Jorge Masvidal acts before the fights and a certain amount of other things, a certain amount of his fan base, they are attracted to him, overall, because Masvidal does have this street rat, street trash sort of image. This wannabe thug, wannabe gangster sort of image. So a lot of people, just like when they watch the Diaz brothers, they're going to be attracted to that type of energy. So when it comes to this fan base, you're gonna get a lot of these goddamn idiots in here overall saying well, Masvidal needs a full training camp and all this other stuff. You know, it was so boring. Also, you know why? Because their favorite guy that represented them overall, or that they wanted to represent them, you know, the wannabe thugs and wannabe gangsters themselves, or street trash, or the street rats, they overall wanted Masvidal to win this fight. All right? But it is what it is. Anyway, so.
That no matter what, but we appreciate your time, Jorge. We know you will be back, and we look forward to that day.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll be right back in the gym. I don't know when I'll be fighting, but I'm a workhorse. I'll be right back in the gym as soon as I get back getting after it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Miami, Houston, California, New York. I let you down. I saw all the bets that came in for me. Tremendous love and support. I'll be back, man. All I can say is I tried my hardest. I'll be back, though. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for watching the.
Anyway, that's really about it. So I'm glad that Masvidal seems to be realistic. Yes, he is going to have to go on a winning streak before he gets an immediate rematch. There's no reason for an immediate rematch, just like there's no reason for a Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov immediate rematch. All right? It is what it is. Good luck to both gentlemen. Good luck to Kamaru Usman. Good luck to Jorge Masvidal. Kamaru Usman had an all-time great performance here in my view. And a lot of people, of course, are not going to say that, well, if you don't want to call it an all-time great performance because it wasn't that impressive, then whatever. But he certainly had a great performance. All right, he completely dominated Jorge Masvidal in this fight. Completely dominated him. Pretty much is what I expected. But it is what it is. And personally, do I believe that Jorge Masvidal is ever going to defeat Kamaru Usman? No, I don't. But it is what it is. Hopefully the man has great self-belief in himself, just the way that he's talking. I don't think that he thinks he can personally defeat Kamaru Usman in the rematch. But we'll see. You know, of course he can't think like that. Of course he has to think anything is possible and that he can defeat him as long as he has a full training camp. That's fine. I have no problem with that. So it is what it is. Either way, looks like he's not making very many excuses. Some would say that he's not making any excuses at all. So good on Jorge Masvidal. Let's hope for him at least that he gets on the winning track. He'll have to face Colby Covington next. He'll have to face Tyron Woodley next, or someone else of that matter. Maybe Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, you know. And I'm not even sure if he's going to be fighting anymore, but we'll see what happens. All right? So, should be interesting. That's really about it for that. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.